Baldur's Gate 3, a game that had an almost record-breaking player count after release, a game that won countless awards from the best storytelling to Game of the Year 2023, and a game so successful that it's even annoying other companies because now everyone expects their games to be the same quality. Well, this game already sounds like some kind of phenomenon. Makes you wonder, is all this success even justified? To answer this question, I decided to dive into the world of Baldur's Gate myself, and I dived so deeply that it couldn't let me go. Alrighty, we've all heard from everyone that Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game, won a ton of awards, blah blah blah, we get it. But now, let's seriously talk about what kind of game this actually is and why it got all the praise it did. Baldur's Gate 3 is a game with great variability that offers players nearly complete freedom of action. But its main charm is that it's almost entirely built upon the mechanics of the turn-based tabletop game Dungeons & Dragons. That means all the mechanics and unique features of the tabletop version have made their way into the game, including the dice. The little thingy that can either let you progress through the story however you want, or turn it into a complete disaster. Important characters will die, all your friends will turn against you, as randomly decided by a dice. Luckily though, you can tweak the randomness a bit by adding bonuses or rerolling the dice. As you might have already guessed, dice rolls are an essential part of Baldur's Gate 3. But what's interesting though, the same can't quite be said about the first two chapters. And that's exactly what I would like to talk about. We still need to understand what makes Baldur's Gate so special and why it has been awaited for decades. And don't worry, this won't take long enough, and alongside you will learn something new and interesting, because this whole journey actually started a long time ago, back when I wasn't even born yet, in the year 1995. Back in the day, a studio named BioWare came up with the idea of creating a computer role-playing game based on the rules of Dungeons & Dragons, which eventually grew into the idea of the first Baldur's Gate, and they took development seriously. After reading every possible Forgotten Realms book and receiving a budget of $1 million, BioWare began developing their game with passion, love for the art, and deep immersion into the setting. For 3 whole years, the developers bent their backs over computers coding Baldur's Gate until its release on December 21, 1998. Initial commercial expectations were pretty low, but ironically, the game defied all odds and became a commercial hit, selling a whopping 2 million copies. God damn, that must have been huge. I wouldn't know, I wasn't around back then. The first Baldur's Gate set the standard for future installments, with the key aspects like choosing your class, race, and abilities at the start, recruiting companions, engaging in quests throughout the game, and more. Most importantly, people bought it, they loved it, and they wanted more. So a sequel wasn't far behind. Just a month after the first game's release, the developers got to work on Baldur's Gate 2 Shadows of Amn. Taking the criticism of the first game into account, they generally aimed to make the sequel basically better and more qualitative. And boy did they succeed. The biggest improvement was in the companions by making them feel more alive. They have also tried to make sure that nearly every player action had an impact on the world. And so, in the spring of 2000, fans finally got their hands on the continuation of Baldur's Gate's story. Unsurprisingly, the game was just as successful as the first, which could only mean one thing. It was time for another sequel, obviously. Everything was going so well, so what could possibly go wrong? Well, you get it, something did go wrong. This time the sequel wasn't being developed by our familiar BioWare, but by Black Isle Studios, and this sequel had the name Baldur's Gate 3, the Black Hound. But as you might have guessed, the world never got to see this new chapter of Baldur's Gate. Why, you ask? Simply, the publisher lost the rights to develop D&D based games. Yes, just because of that. And from that moment on, Baldur's Gate as a franchise entered some dark times. I mean, something was still being released, like the enhanced edition of the first two games in 2012 and 2013 by Beamdog Division, which were basically just improved versions of the originals. And in 2016 there was even an expansion, Baldur's Gate Age of Dragonspear, which took place between the events of the first and second chapters. However, it didn't achieve the same level of success as its predecessors. And so, Baldur's Gate slowly faded into memory, becoming one of those once great franchises that never got a true continuation. That is, until the heroes of today's video, Larian Studios, came storming into the office of the company holding the D&D license, Wizards of the Coast, in 2014 with a proposal to develop the long-awaited Baldur's Gate 3. To which Wizards of the Coast said, no. Larian shrugged, moved on, and focused on developing the second part of their already popular game, Divinity Original Sin, which left a mark as an excellent turn-based RPG. Fast forward to 2017. After the release of Divinity Original Sin 2, Wizards of the Coast took a look at it and went, "Damn, alright, these guys actually know how to make games." So they reached out to Larian Studios asking if they were still interested in making Baldur's Gate 3, to which Larian responded, "Hell yeah." And so the responsibility of developing a worthy successor to Baldur's Gate fell on Larian's shoulders, preserving the original atmosphere and experience with a modern approach. Not an easy task, I will say, but they handled it the right way. Firstly, they made the game turn-based. Secondly, to truly capture the D&D experience, they didn't just blindly follow the rulebook, but made some exceptions. After all, even tabletop players love to bend the rules from time to time. And lastly, they launched early access, allowing players to give feedback, and in return, the developers could simply make the game better. For some reason, other developers don't do this very often. And so, after years of testing and development, Baldur's Gate 3 was officially released on August 3rd, 2023. You know the rest. Game of the year, players overjoyed and widespread praise. But among those same fans of the original games, one question remained. Did Baldur's Gate 3 manage to capture the same atmosphere, the same engaging gameplay, the same sense of adventure and the same exciting companions? Well, let's find out. I suggest starting our discussion about Baldur's Gate from the very beginning, like literally from character creation. And holy hell, the game hasn't even started yet and it's already forcing us to make important life decisions. I've got enough of those in real life. The sheer number of choices can be overwhelming, so my advice to you, don't stress over it. Pick whoever you like the most. The most important thing here is your class, and even that can be changed later in the game, so really don't worry about it. The only thing I think you should really actually pay attention to is your abilities. The higher an ability, the more bonus you get when rolling the dice. So, for example, if you are playing as a bard, your primary ability is Charisma. The higher your Charisma, the better your chances of hitting an enemy with your class spells. Plus, since Charisma affects dialogue skills, it will be easier to persuade or deceive NPCs. And yeah, each class has its own main ability, and that ability has its own bonuses to various mechanics, blah blah blah, you get the idea. After spending an hour creating your character and finally starting the game itself opens up with a complete freedom of action. No, I'm like, seriously, this sheer level of variety in Baldur's Gate, I don't even know what else compares to it. Even something as simple as getting past an area with hostile NPCs, you don't have to just fight your way through. You can negotiate, sneak past, use disguise to blend in, or even just walk right through with invisibility. And this variety isn't just for the open world, but also for quests. Quests are one of the key aspects of this game. There's a whole bunch of them, and they are even interesting enough. Quest givers aren't just lifeless NPCs with dialogues like "Hi, hello, bring this, do that, now gone," and keep yourself safe. No, they are not like that at all. They have personalities, desires, and the quests themselves are different for each character. Not all of them are mind-blowingly exciting, of course, but I'm sure you'll find plenty of interesting ones. Oh, and one more thing. Remember how this game has insane variety? Every quest can be completed or failed in multiple ways, and depending on your action and dialogue choices, you might get or a cool reward, or a lot of gold, or even nothing. That happened to me a few times. One thing I really loved about the quests is that the game never forgets about the characters we encounter. If you help someone in Act 1, there's a high chance you'll run into them in Act 2 or Act 3. For example, I helped this one woman with a problem early in the game. She thanked me and we both went our separate ways. And then, dozens of hours later, I randomly walked into an abandoned house in Act 3 and, surprise, there she was in a group with other people. I mean, it's not some mind-blowing feature, but still, I was genuinely happy to see her again, almost like running into an old friend. And yet, if I'm being honest, not every quest reward is amazing. Sometimes they are kinda... I remember a moment where I also helped a certain character in Act 1, and then in Act 3 I ran into him again and helped him with his new problem. It was such a long, tedious quest, but I thought the harder the quest, the better the reward. Am I right? Well, a portrait of my character as a reward that I can't even hang on a wall really encourages me to never talk to this guy ever again. So, there's one more thing that some people might find a bit boring. Sometimes to progress in the quest, you have to read a letter. Like, I wouldn't call it a huge downside, but honestly, it does get tiring at times. By the end of the game I was just opening the notes, updating the quest and immediately moving on. I only really read them when they were tied to the main story or an interesting quest. There are just too many of them, I don't know. Well, one way or another, quests play a rather important role in Baldur's Gate 3. In fact, I don't know why I haven't mentioned this before, but almost every quest is at least somewhat connected to the main story. Some quests are very weakly related, while others fully transition into significant story missions, even though they might have started as an optional 20-minute side adventure. This doesn't make all quests mandatory, of course. Not forget, this is Baldur's Gate. Yes, you can simply ignore all the quests if you wish, but is that really what you want? At the very least, you'll miss out on items that could greatly assist you in combat, and at most, you will skip a ton of content. Doesn't sound very appealing, does it? Oh, and skipping those quests also means missing out on one of Baldur's Gate 3's most exciting mechanic, like combat. Oh, finally it's time to talk about it. This is where not only your chosen class, but the entire game truly shines, I would say. Combat is probably the best aspect of this game, but I understand this panel with a billion buttons might scare away newcomers, so don't worry, this horror doesn't fall on you right from the start. Baldur's Gate in general isn't like other games in this genre. Typically in such games you have to spend hundreds or thousands of hours memorizing numbers, figuring out what works against what and what a newbie might never fully grasp. Thank goodness none of that is here. Baldur's Gate is simple compared to other games in this genre. Like, yeah, I didn't get into the combat right away, but I picked it up relatively quickly. And mind you, I am still a total newbie in this genre. The game gradually teaches you how things work. When you start, you only have a few amount of action and spells, and the first fight immediately teaches you like, oh, I can only move a certain number of meters per turn. This attack deals damage. Oh, and this one buffs our team. I can only take one action per turn. Wait, I used up my spell slot? Oh, we also have a bonus action. I can use it, for example, to drink a potion. And there you go. Now you just have to figure out what concentration, initiative and a few other things are, and boom, you've learned the basics. Although, let's be real, knowing the basics won't instantly make you good at fights. Never underestimate enemies in this game. Even early on, they will give you a decent challenge. And by the way, if you are a complete beginner like me and want to play Baldur's Gate, do not even think about picking a difficulty higher than balanced. You will definitely regret it. Learn the game first and then feel free to crank up the challenge, because only with practice comes understanding, and only from understanding comes all kinds of interesting, cool tactics. For example, later in the game, I loved setting up an area that constantly dealt damage and then pulling enemies into it every turn. It didn't always go as planned, but when it worked, oh, it worked beautifully. And that's just one of a billion tactics you can come up with in this game. The only thing you really need to think about is the environment you are fighting in, and use it wisely, or it will be used against you. Enemies and bosses here do not mess around. Baldur's Gate is basically a sandbox. The higher your level, the more and cooler spells and abilities you get. Oh, and by the way, the class you picked up at the start, you can totally mix with another one during the level up. If you ever felt limited with just one class, multiclassing is where your creativity can really run wild. But to be honest, this is more for advanced players, and yeah, it's kinda broken. You can create some absolutely busted builds with it, so it's not really my thing. I tried multiclassing only once with level 3 bard and level 9 sorcerer. Absolute cut tire build, by the way. Can't talk my way out of anything and still deal massive damage in fights. Long story short, if we are talking about Baldur's Gate as a game with variety, then combat is where that variety truly shines. You can create the dumbest build ever and it still will work. Like, you can literally make a build where you insult enemies to death. Hello, people out here beating the game with a freaking salami, what else is there to say? The only real downside to the combat is when you are up against way too many enemies in one fight. Sitting there for 2 minutes waiting for everyone to take their turn can get really exhausting. And no idea why they didn't add a speed up option, but at least there aren't too many of those fights in this game. By the way, if you made it so far, I have a suggestion about subscribing to this channel, but if you enjoyed this video, of course, this would really help me out. Okay, so yeah, quests and combat are fun, yeah, but let's be real, the game wouldn't be nearly as fascinating without its story and characters. Personally, my favorite part of Baldur's Gate. Honestly, I have always found it hard to evaluate a story. I just don't quite get the criteria for doing so. But based on my experience, the story is not bad. I would say even good enough, even though the ending was quite predictable. At the start of the game, you get a tadpole shot straight into your head, and as soon as you recover from the absolute shock of life pulling such a cruel prank on you, you set off on a journey with one goal: finding someone who can help you get rid of it. And so, with that context, you embark on your adventure, role-playing your character and shaping your own story, while either becoming the savior of Baldur's Gate or its absolute destroyer. Oh, and by the way, the game technically has only 2 endings, a good one and a bad one. But what really adds depth to these endings are the characters you've interacted with, helped, and most importantly, traveled with. Oh, the characters in this game, they are incredible. Each has their own personality, their own unique trait that doesn't make them the same and which is revealed only through dialogue. The more you talk to someone, the more you start to think, do I actually want to help this person, or should I just tell them to get lost, because what's with the attitude, man? Sometimes the game outright asks you whether a certain character will be useful in your journey or if they will be a total nightmare. In moments like this, your companions always can help you by sharing their opinion. You meet them along the way and spend with them the entire game. At the start, some will treat you with suspicion, others will constantly butt heads because of their personalities. Overall, each has their own personal struggles, but still, you all share a common goal that unites you somehow. the tadpole that you all are trying to get rid of. And as you travel together, at some point you will notice that those who once seemed ready to kill each other are now getting along. Other companions begin to trust you more, open up about themselves, and you start getting to them more and more attached. You care about them in return, or even build romantic relationships with them. Your companions' stories are captivating in their own way. Each is unique. Some got into trouble by accident, some put their trust in the wrong person and were betrayed, and these past events will continue to haunt them even throughout your journey. But the best part, you can actually help them. In some situations, you can say just the right thing, and if they trust you, they will listen.
Yes, but you say all sorts of things. Honestly, I don't even listen half the time.
Okay, fine, with some it's more difficult than you'd like, but you get the point. The key is to build their trust through dialogue. And what I love most about the companions' storylines, even if you don't actively pursue a character's arc, they will still develop and reveal more about themselves as the game progresses. It keeps getting more and more interesting. No, seriously, like for example, at first Will didn't really catch my attention. I kinda ignored him when I was at camp and all that, but by Act 3, after certain story twists, I suddenly realized I started to care about him. And in that final third act, his story finally hooked me, and I somehow managed to get him a positive ending. But then there were characters who grabbed me right from the start, like Shadowheart, God's favorite princess, a follower of some Shar and an unfortunate soul with amnesia, who, as she develops, will share her thoughts about her face and reveal bits of her past, or at least the parts she can remember. And depending on your choices throughout her storyline, she will be faced with an incredibly heavy moral decision at the end. But what exactly that decision is, I would say. And while I think Shadowheart has the most interesting story, the most heartbreaking ones definitely belongs to Asterion and especially Kalak. I won't go into details, but when they open up about their pain, when you see how much they have suffered, it really hits hard. Moments like this make the characters feel truly alive, and I'm sure I'm not the only one who felt this way. And the best part of all this, after finishing the game, gathering once more after several months in your familiar camp and hearing what your companions are... wait, no. At this point, they are not just companions anymore. After such a long journey, they have become real friends to us, and it's so heartwarming to listen to how one became an adventurer, other became a teacher, and all because at some point you managed to talk them out of some bad choice that could have ruined their life. I think this is the detail that touched me the most in Baldur's Gate. So, back to the main question of this video. After this long rant, can I call Baldur's Gate 3 overrated or something like that? Honestly, no, absolutely not. At least that's not how I will describe it. This was a truly captivating adventure, one I would recommend to anyone. It feels like nice fairy tale where you are the main character. I get that this game isn't for anyone, but if you have been craving something fresh, hey, why not give it a shot? The only thing that might put you off at first is the somewhat confusing combat and a little boring start. But trust me, the combat isn't nearly as complicated as it first seems, and the beginning, you can push through it. After all, a game like this needs time to unfold properly. I want to share something with you, how I personally define a truly great piece of media. If after experiencing it, so whether it's a game, a movie or music, you feel inspired to dive deeper into its genre or even create something of your own, that's the sign of something truly special. For example, after Yaylocker, about which I by the way recently made a video, I discovered so many new genres and even found a fresh appreciation for music. And the same thing happened with Baldur's Gate. Would I have ever played Divinity Original Sin if it weren't for this game? Never in a million years. But after Baldur's Gate, hell yeah, no, why not? This game is worth your attention. There's a reason so many people praise it. And really, what more proof do you need than the fact that you are practically on the verge of tears when you see your companions, the ones you've spent so much time with, finally getting a good ending to their story, when the townspeople you've helped throughout your journey now write you letters, sharing their lives and thanking you for being there. And as you sit here reading those letters and saying your final goodbyes to your companions, you feel this overwhelming sense of happiness, because at last everyone is okay. It's strange, but it is so wonderful. Thank you for watching.